Hello, 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 and welcome to the next video in our series of Intro to Creative Web Dev videos that we've been doing. So far, you've learned quite a bit, actually. You started in P5, and then you went through HTML and finished up CSS, and now this video is going to introduce a new language, yet another language called JavaScript. And spoiler alert, you've actually seen JavaScript already, but I'm gonna hold off on talking about that until we get to the libraries week. Um, Anyway, just to get started, let me maybe just go to Replit right away and just kind of talk through some of this stuff. So I'm going to my code editor and I'm going to create a new project. I'm just going to call it JavaScript. You can create a new HTML, CSS, JS project. It's all good. I'm going to call it like JavaScript lesson. Sure. It doesn't matter. Okay, so that is starting up, and Replit gives me some starter code, which I absolutely hate. So I'm going to get rid of almost all of it. Yeah, you know what? I'm getting rid of all of it. And all I have is hello world, and I'm going to run that. And here we go. Okay, so far what we've seen is HTML, where I can do things like have different tags that tell the browser like how to display or what kind of content to display in the web page. So I can have like an H1 tag that's like my website, whatever. I should probably get more creative at coming up with example content, but it doesn't really matter. Also, I should probably make this a little bit bigger. Whoops, should have done that ahead of time. But I have my HTML in here, and I'm going to hit run, and you can see that I have my H1 tag and my P tag. And then we talked about so this is HTML, and this is one language. This is one programming language that's used in web development, and it has a particular syntax in that you use these like angle brackets and then like the name of HTML tags and then content inside of the tags, and that tells your web browser what kind of content to display. So in this case, it's a heading and a paragraph. And then you can use all kinds of other tags, but we already kind of talked about that, so I'm going to not talk about it too much right now. Then the next thing we learned about was CSS. So that is a new tag called the style tag, and then in here you can put CSS. So you can say, I actually want my H1 to not be this like default black color. I actually want it to be red. And this is a different syntax. This is a different language. So there's HTML and then there's CSS, which is a different language than HTML. That's why it has these different kind of syntax rules where instead of HTML tags and content, it's now CSS selectors and style properties. So if I run this, now my heading is red, and you can get into different kinds of selectors and different kinds of styling properties. But the important thing to note here is it's just a different syntax with different kind of rules around how you write it and what it does. So CSS is the styles for the content, which is HTML. Okay, so that's kind of just a review of what we've done over the last few weeks. And now I want to introduce a new language. So we've learned HTML and we've learned CSS, and now here's a new language. I'm going to get rid of my style tag because we're not going to talk about CSS very much in this week, if at all. And I'm going to show you a new HTML tag, and that tag is the script tag. So I'm going to type script, and Replit gives me a automatic closing tag for it. Cool. And this is very similar to the style tag, keeping in mind that the style tag let us write a different language in our file here, in our index.html file. And the script tag lets us write a different language, and in this case, the language is JavaScript. And JavaScript is useful for things like making your web page interactive, making it do stuff. So HTML, you can tell your browser to display an H1 tag and a P tag and like a UL tag or an image. And that's good for things like static content where the only thing that the user can do is sort of read the web page. That's HTML. And then CSS is for styling that content. And JavaScript is for making your web page do stuff. So just to get something working, I'm going to write some JavaScript. And since you've come from P5, this is going to seem really familiar to you. And there's a reason for that I'm going to hold off on talking about too much. So JavaScript uses the idea of functions that you call, and you give those functions arguments. So for example, I can call the alert function, and I'm going to type the name of the alert function, which is just alert, and then an open parenthesis, and then I'm going to give it a parameter. In this case, I'm going to give it some text in between like single quotation marks, and I'm just going to say like hello. And then I'm going to end it with a semicolon. So let me zoom in on that if I can. Yeah. So the syntax is inside of my script tag, I have a single line of code right now, which is JavaScript that calls the alert function. And then inside of parentheses, it passes in a single text message. In this case, just hello. I could change this to like hello world. But it's inside of single quotes, so it's a single string of characters, and then the closing parenthesis after the argument, and then a semicolon to finish it all out. So now I'm going to run this, and let's see what happens. So you see, I don't know if I can move this. No, I can't. That now my web page, when I go to it, or when I navigate to it, or when I click the run button in Replit, I now have this dialog that pops up, and it says, hello world. Here is the, can I zoom in on this? No, I can't, that's annoying. Here is the message that I passed into the alert function. So this is the website now doing something. It's showing this message in the alert box. And then when I click OK, then it loads the rest of the web page. So let me open this up in a new tab just to kind of see what that looks like. So when the web page is still loading, it shows me this message, hello world, and I can click OK, and the web page continues loading. So that is JavaScript in like one line of code, is showing an alert message by calling the alert function and giving it a message to show. Now there's all kinds of other things you can do in JavaScript, just like there were all kinds of other things you could do in P5, and all kinds of other tags you could call in HTML, and all kinds of style properties you could use in CSS. It's not like alert is the only function, but I'm using this to sort of show you the syntax of getting JavaScript to work. So from here, there's a few things I want to talk about. Next, let's say, okay, so I've got my alert line of code here working, and it works, and that's good, but it's not really useful right now unless you want to annoy your users and just say hello world at the very beginning. This is probably not what your end goal is if you're learning JavaScript. Likely you want to do something like, I don't know, when the user clicks a button, you want to do something with some information that they entered and, you know, interact with the user that way. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is how do I get this to happen not when the page first loads, but instead when the user clicks on something. So I'm going to start out by changing my code to define a function. So to do that, and again, since you have seen P5, this is going to seem familiar. To define a function, I am going to use the function keyword. So function, and then a space, and then I'm going to give my function a name. It can be anything I want. In this case, I'm going to say like, say hello, and then a open parenthesis, and then in here, it's going to be any parameters you want to take. I'm not going to take any, so I'm just going to close it immediately. And then a opening curly brace, and Replit gives me the closing curly brace automatically. And then I like to give myself some white space just to give myself some room to type. And what I want to do is move this line of code into my say hello function. Okay, so now in my index.html file, I have a script tag, and inside of that script tag, I have some JavaScript, which defines a single function called say hello, and that function contains a single line of code that calls alert with hello world. Now if I run my code, if I go over here and I click run, now I no longer see that my alert pops up. It doesn't pop up automatically because nothing is calling this automatically. And you might remember from a previous lesson when we learned about events and input in p5 that you can do things like define like mouse clicked or mouse pressed functions, and p5 will automatically call those for you. JavaScript is not that fancy. It doesn't call things automatically for you, but you can tell JavaScript when to call a certain function. So for example, I'm going to go down here and say on my p tag, let's say, I am going to add an attribute. So to do that, let me zoom in a little bit. Ooh, I kind of like this feature. Inside of my sort of opening p tag, like inside of the angle brackets before the closing angle bracket here, I'm going to add a space, and then I'm going to type on click. So all lowercase. On click looks like Replit gives me some options. That's cool. I guess on double click is if you double click, probably. Anyway, and then an equals sign, and then 2 quotation marks. So double quotation marks and double quotation marks. And in here, I can write any JavaScript I want, really. So I could actually say like alert test, and then closing, and okay. So now I am saying that this paragraph, this p tag, has an on-click attribute, which is telling your browser that when the user clicks on this p tag, run this JavaScript. And okay, let me zoom out and let's run that and see what happens. So I'm going to run this, and I'm going to click hello world here, and now we see test. It's really tiny, can't really see it, but there it is. And that's because of the sort of mix of HTML and JavaScript that we have right now. Is telling the browser that when someone clicks on this p tag, then run this JavaScript. And that JavaScript calls the alert function, passes in a parameter of test, which causes the browser to show that alert. So I can click it multiple times, click OK, and it's all good. So you can put any JavaScript you want inside of those quotation marks, but usually you want to keep this JavaScript as simple as possible, just because it gets really complicated if you have like multiple lines of code that you want to run when something is clicked or when something happens. So usually this is just a single function call. So I'm going to call like say hello. So now I'm saying that when the user clicks on this p tag, then call the say hello function. I have defined the say hello function to call the alert function. So let me run this and click it, and now I should see hello world here. Okay, so that was a lot of me sort of typing a mix of like HTML and JavaScript, and like HTML tags and HTML attributes and JavaScript code and functions and calling functions and defining functions. And so I want to stop here and say you are going to get errors. I hope that by now you believe me that getting errors is a normal part of coding. And when that happens, it's okay. Don't panic. But here are some tips or some tools that you can use to sort of debug when things go awry. So let's say, I don't know, let's say I had typed this instead. So now my code says alert hello world, and Replit is smart enough to kind of give you some indications that something is wonky here. But let's just say that maybe I missed that, or maybe it just wasn't there. So let me run this code, and now I'm going to click on my p tag here, and what the heck, like nothing happens. And this is very, very common when you are writing JavaScript, that the thing that you expected to happen just kind of doesn't happen. There's no big obvious error message. There's no big warning. There's nothing is turning like bright red and flashing at you. And that's intentional. That's by design. Your browser kind of hides error messages from you, which is nice when you are just like a user in the world navigating around the internet. You don't want to see like every single error message that every single web page ever encounters. But since you are a web developer now, you actually do care. You actually do care about the error messages that your browser is encountering. So to get access to those, the way I do it is if you right click basically anywhere in your browser and then click this inspect button, that will open up oh, this is going to get really annoying. That will open up another tab, which is your browser's developer tools. Let me kind of collapse some of these. Sure, good enough. And your developer tools give you access to a lot of things. So for example, that inspect feature gives me access to the underlying HTML. So like if you're curious, you can see the underlying HTML for all of Replit. It's all, available in your browser. But the thing I want to sort of draw your attention to right now is the console tab right here. So I'm going to zoom in. No. So click this console button, and this takes you to a page where all of your error messages will go. So let me clear this out using this button, and let me click around a little bit. So let me run this, or let me click here, and you'll see that now we are getting this error message, and it'd be really nice if I could zoom in. So this might be a little small on the video, sorry, but you can maybe see that you are getting a message here. In this case, it is saying, say hello is not defined when I click this. And I wonder if I go over to this in its own tab, what do I see? So I'm going to open up my developer tools. A couple ways I can do it. So I can right click and inspect just like I did before. Or another way to do it is up here in the three-dot menu. If I go to more tools and I go to developer tools, that will also pop it up. So let me refresh just so I have the latest version. And yeah, here you go. You get another error message here, like on load, because it's saying missing parenthesis after argument list, and you can click here to like see what it looks like, and this is the code. So this is more information about the error message that I just got, and you can even like type this error message into your browser. So for more information, if you're not sure what an error message is telling you, you can read more about it here and get more information. And this is a clue that you need to sort of go back to your code and sort of squint at it and compare it to what like the tutorials that you're reading in this video have shown you. In this case, we know ahead of time what the problem is. I got rid of my quotation marks, but you can use your developer tools in your JavaScript console to debug your problems. So when your code stops working, look in your JavaScript console. That's the first place you should look. And I actually usually just leave it open the entire time I'm debugging when I'm coding. But okay, so now my code works again, and now I have a script tag that contains a say hello function, and that say hello function calls the alert function. So now when I click on my p tag, I say hello world. Okay, so this is all well and good, but chances are, unless you want to annoy your user, you're not here to show alert dialogues. This is a pretty low level function. I chose it just because it takes a single argument and it's like very obvious when it's working and not working, but chances are it's probably not what you want to do. So the next thing I want to talk about is the idea of interacting with the HTML that's on your web page. So just to get something working, maybe I will, how do I want to do this? First, what I want to do is maybe I'll just change this to a button just to get myself started. So instead of a p tag here, I want a button. And this doesn't really make a difference. It's just probably something that you are curious about because you likely didn't want to create like paragraphs that people click on. You probably wanted to make a button. So I'm going to use the button tag, and I'm going to say like click me. And everything else is the same. It's still an on-click attribute, still the say hello function, but I'm going to save this and run it. And now I have this button and it says click me. And now I still have my alert. So nothing has changed in that regard. But next, what I want to do is I want to add a new p tag. And this p tag, if you remember from the lesson on CSS, you can do things like add like a class attribute to it, or you can add an ID attribute. So I'm going to add an ID attribute, and I'm going to say I'm going to call it something like output maybe. And the p tag is empty by default, or maybe I'll just put like loading. So I'm going to run that, and the only thing that should change is now I see loading ... here. You know, I could change this to really anything I want, but I just put loading ... for now. So now the thing I want to change is, instead of calling the alert function here, or maybe in addition to, maybe I'll do both. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a variable. And again, if you've seen P5, this will look familiar, by using the let keyword. So I'm going to say let, and the name of the variable is completely up to me. I can call it anything I want. I'm going to call it like output element, and I'm going to set that equal to I want to call a function, and that function is going to give me this element so that I can start messing around with it. And that function is document.getElement by ID, like that, and it takes an ID. In this case, I'm going to say output. And now I have the output element. So in my JavaScript, I am now referencing this p tag, and I can do a lot of different things with it, and I'll talk about how to find those things in a second. But for now, I'm going to say output element dot inner text equals hello world, and I'll close that out with a semicolon. So this is using the output element, and that output element has a variable inside of it, we'll call it, called inner text, and I can set that to hello world. So let me run this and let's see what happens. So now I'm going to click my button, which is, you know, this line of code here, and that onClick attribute points to or calls the say hello function. And the say hello function, reading it line by line, will first show an alert. Then it will create a variable and set that variable equal to the element with the ID of output. And then it'll set the inner text of that output to hello world. So let's see if that will work. Let's click me, and okay, now I see my alert, and I click OK, and my element has changed to hello world. So my JavaScript has updated my web page. So now you can think about other things you can do with you know, writing code that changes the web page from underneath it. Okay, so now I can maybe get rid of this alert, because, you know, likely you don't actually care about that. You probably don't want to show an alert. So I'm going to hit run, and now when I click me, it says hello world. And the next thing I want to talk about in this video is, so far all of our code has kind of been static, and, you know, I can make a button that says click me, and that button can do something. I can get an element and change that element. But next, what if I wanted to interact with the user? I wanted to get information from the user and then do something. So we're already kind of doing that with this onClick attribute. But I want to take it maybe one step further and maybe enter like an input box. So I can use the input tag in HTML, and I'm going to give it this an ID already. I'm going to call this maybe I'll just call it input. It's not super creative, but whatever. And I think it's a self-closing tag, so I'm going to do it that way. If I didn't know how to write an input, use the input tag, I would just go to like my favorite search engine, type in HTML input element or input tag or something, and you'll get all kinds of information here. So looks like it has all kinds of different attributes it can take, and yeah, it's self-closing. And actually, I think I don't even need that self-closing thing anymore. So let's just do it that way. So let me run this and just see what happens, see if that works. And okay, my button and my input are sort of on the same line. I could maybe use some CSS to fix that if I wanted to change it. Maybe I'll just keep it that way, actually. Kind of up to you, personal preference. But now I have an input. I currently don't do anything with the input, so I can type anything I want in here. I could say click me, and I still just say hello world. But now what I want to do is, in my JavaScript, in my say hello function, I want to first get a reference to this input element. So I'm going to say let, I don't know, input element equals, and I'm going to call the document.getElement by ID, document.getElement by ID function, and I'm going to give it an argument which matches the ID that I used in my HTML down here. So now I have the reference to the actual element in my JavaScript, and so now I can interact with it. And I'm kind of flying through some of this, but I want to remember to go back and talk about like other ways to get more information versus just listening to me talk. But for now, I'm going to just fly through it and then circle back to how I know about this stuff. So I can say input element. Actually, what I want to do is create a new variable. I'm going to say like let, I don't know, like username equals input element. I have to spell it right. Input element dot value. And okay, so now I have this username, which is in input.value, and I can maybe test this out by saying alert username, and I'll run this. And so now I will type in my name here, Kevin, and I'll click me, and I see Kevin here, which means that I'm successfully getting the username out of this input box. Right now, all I'm doing is alerting it, but now I can change this line of code to do something like hello plus username plus maybe an exclamation point and then a semicolon. So now if we read the code line by line, I first get a reference to the input element by calling the document.getElementById function with an input parameter here to match the IDs. And then I create a new variable called username, and I set that equal to whatever the element's value is. I remember the username. Then I say create a new variable called output element, set that equal to the reference to whatever element has the ID of output, which is this one down here. And then finally, I say output element, take that element and set its inner text to this whole thing, hello plus username plus an exclamation point. So let me run that again. And now I'm going to say, type in my name, and I'll say click me. And now it says, hello, Kevin. I can change this to, I don't know, Ada. Click me, hello, Ada. I can change it to, anything I want. Blah, blah, blah. And I'll click here, and there it is. So this is sort of two sides of the coin of JavaScript and interactive HTML. I am using JavaScript to, first of all, sort of get information from the user. So I am getting a reference to the input element, and then I'm getting the value from the input element. That's one side of the coin, like input. And then the other side of the coin is output. So now I am getting a reference to the output element. In this case, it's just a p tag. And then I'm setting the inner text to something. And, from here we could get into other things like, if statements that could maybe check like whether this is the correct format, or maybe you're looking for a certain name or a password or something. But for now, I think I'm going to leave it at sort of input, output. And that's sort of the fundamentals of interactive HTML in JavaScript. Okay, so before I close out, I want to talk about like how the heck did I know any of that? So when we were learning P5, I used the reference page as sort of the source of truth because this was pretty much everything you can do in P5. Now, we are currently not using P5. We are using JavaScript, which is a different thing. I'll just put it that way. So the P5 reference won't really help us right now. And there isn't really like a single JavaScript reference because JavaScript is huge. There's a lot of things you can do with it. But I will say that there are some go-to resources that I really like. So one thing you can do is type like specific function names into Google or into your favorite search engine. So I'm going to type like JavaScript, and then I'm going to type get element by ID, or just paste it in, and I'll hit enter, and you'll get lots of resources and like tutorials and all kinds of references. So MDN is probably the best one there is. This is you can think of this as very similar to the P5 reference page, where it gives you the sort of syntax and then tells you more about like how to use it. You'll have information about like the different parameters it'll take and like examples. And so this is one place you can go to get more information. The other place that I would recommend is W3 Schools. So I'm going to click here. And W3 Schools is kind of an older reference page and has some history to it, but it's actually pretty good, I think. But anyway, this is another way to get information, and you can kind of think of this as being similar to the P5 reference in that this is, you know, everything you can do in, well, not everything, but a lot of things that you can do in JavaScript. So I don't know, I didn't plan this ahead, but let's see. Can I do something like, can I look around at what this stuff gives me? So this is document object model, which is like the stuff we're using. So can I do, is there like get element by, okay. Oh, that's just going to be a bunch of references on the same page. Okay, here we are. This is what I was looking for. So I specifically use the get element by ID function just because I think it's really handy. And for now, I think it'll be enough. But you know, if you wanted to peruse the other things that you can do in JavaScript, exactly the same way you perused the P5 reference, you know, you can read through some of these things. So for example, I don't know, you can say get elements by tag name, and this will now give you every like P tag or every H1 tag, and you can do, you know, interesting things with that. But for now, the get element by ID function will be probably good enough. But I don't know if you wanted to get more information about like that alert function that we were using earlier. That's annoying. I am the way this is organized is a little confusing. Yeah, there's just so many things you can do. So I don't know. I don't have a good like go-to place to look because there's so many things you can do. But like I don't know. Here's one that's like probably a little advanced, but it's something that's interesting to play for. Is like if you wanted to learn more about like getting data from one website into your website. So if you wanted to like work with Wikipedia articles, for example, in your web page, here's more information about it. So anyway, you can click around MDN and around W3 Schools to get more information about the kinds of things you can do in JavaScript. You don't just have to do like exactly what I am telling you. So another example is like create element. Let's say I wanted to create a new element from JavaScript instead of having them ahead of time. Here's more information about how you might do that. Yeah, I think I'll maybe end there. The very last thing I want to mention is, okay, so in our code so far, we have used the script tag, and that works, and it's okay to use for now, and it's all good, but it's generally not the way you'll see quote unquote real code written. So instead of having this like script tag with JavaScript inside of it, what you'll usually see is, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to delete it. Well, I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to keep my script tag around, but instead of containing any JavaScript itself, I am going to add an attribute. So I'm going to say script source equals, and then in quotation marks, I'm going to use the name of a JavaScript file, and not coincidentally, Replit gives you one by default. So I'm going to say script.js here. And then over in my script.js file, that's where I'll write my JavaScript. That's gross. Does auto format? It doesn't. It does. Cool. So now I have script.js, which is a JavaScript file, which contains JavaScript code. And then back in my index.html file, instead of having a big mix of both, you know, JavaScript code and HTML, I have this single line of code in index.html, which says, hey, go load script.js and bring in whatever code is over there in that file. This is really similar to the link tag that we use in with CSS to point to a separate CSS file. So maybe I'll go get that line of code in a second. But now if I run this, this should still work. If I type in Kevin, I click me, I still say hello Kevin, because I am loading the JavaScript that's over in that file. So maybe the very, very, very last thing I do will be to sort of maybe tie all of this together and create a new project. And I'm going to just, whatever, we keep the default name. And sort of talk about the starter code that Replit gives you, because now you have enough information to sort of understand all of this stuff. So, well, I'm going to actually delete this last part because that's just an annoying thing that Replit adds. But now you know what this line of code does. You learned this a couple weeks ago, where you loaded a CSS file called style.css into your index.html file. And now you know what this line of code does too. It loads whatever JavaScript is over in this file. By default, it's empty, but you can put, whatever JavaScript you want over here. So that is the sort of starter code that Replit gives you. The rest of it you can look up because that's HTML tags, but that's the sort of new syntax, and now you sort of have a rough idea of what Replit gives you. Anyway, okay, this video is a little bit longer than I intended, so I apologize, but to maybe just summarize real quick, what we talked about now was JavaScript, which is a new-ish language that uses a different syntax. It's not HTML, it's not CSS, it's JavaScript, and JavaScript works by defining functions that you point to in your index or in your HTML file, generally with like event callbacks like on click, or there's also on load, different things you can use. But usually you're going to tell your HTML that, hey, when the user does something or when something happens in the page, then run this function. And then whatever function that is usually like over in script.js. And that function then contains your JavaScript code, which works by calling its own functions. So in this case, I am calling the document.getElementById function, which gives me an element. Then I'm getting the value from that element, and then I'm getting a different element to hold my output, and then I'm setting the inner text of that element. So this is the very beginnings of interactive HTML using JavaScript. Other than that, you can look stuff up in MDN and W3 schools. For example, if you wanted more information about like this value field, how is that working? You can go to your favorite search engine and type in like get element by ID value, probably, and you'll get all kinds of information here. So now we are back on MDN, and if I type in value, somewhere in there, it'll give you more information. Navigating the references is sometimes tricky, but it's another part of coding. So down here, do I have a value? TUV, no. Get element by ID, JavaScript, elements, maybe. Okay, here I think is what I'm looking for. So here is the sort of value returned from the get element by ID function. And if I wanted to learn more about value, then I could go down here to, well, I'm just going to do Control F for value. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to sit here and find it because it's going to be super annoying, but it's in here somewhere. And I encourage you to sort of explore the documentation to get more information. Anyway, all right, that was a random aside. But all right, all of that was JavaScript, and from here you can now make interactive web pages by getting input from the user and providing output to the user using JavaScript. But all right, I'm going to end it there. This was a long one. So thanks for sticking with me. Thanks for watching. And I will see you in the next one where we'll actually use some of this to do some fun like project stuff. So all right, see you in the next one.